Hello, everybody. It's good to see you. I'm Annie Brock, President and CEO of the Leader Transition Institute. Welcome to our March edition of Learn, Do, Grow, Repeat. We provide these sessions primarily for the alumni of our flagship program, Changing Focus Moving from We to Me. It's important to us that we provide them with ongoing enriching training that dives deep into the skills and concepts that will help them push their boundaries in this next part of their lives and set high goals for themselves. But we know what they're learning from this can be applicable to many other people. So if that's you, thank you for joining us too. Today, we are graced with Bill Kiefer. He is spent over 20 years as a senior human resources and talent management leader in large, complex global for-profit companies. Spent over a decade and in the Army, 5 years as an entrepreneur. Bill leverages his unique experiences and ability to connect things, solve problems, and create solutions that close gaps, overcome challenges, seize opportunities, optimize talent capability for individuals and organizations, and positively impacts current and long-term business success. He is the president and chief advisor of the for-profit company Kiefer and Associates Limited, and is also the founder of a 501c3, a nonprofit called the Veteran Career Journey that is dedicated to closing the culture gap that stands between veterans and civilian employers, and to reducing veteran suicide by sharing insights to the civilian work world's culture, norms, and expectations so that veterans are better prepared before they make the transition. And that's so important, and it's why Bill is here. He and I have been connected on LinkedIn for a while. We ran into each other at the Military Influencer Conference in Las Vegas this fall. And I said, Bill, we need to get you on one of these sessions. We put it on the calendar back then. So thank you, Bill, for being here with us today.
Thank you, Annie. It's great to be here.
Awesome. And I'm grateful to Bill because he's traveling. He is on week 2 of a 7-week journey around the United States, teaching for the Honor Foundation and for his own organization around the country. Today he is in San Diego. So while it is 12:02 on the East Coast, it is 9:02 where he is. I want to start by asking you, Bill, and then I'm going to let you ramble a little bit and talk about the things that you want to do. But I want to start by asking you, what is the best way for service members who become veterans to fit into the corporate culture? What are the steps that they need to take?
No, that's a great question. And when I work with folks, I always advise you have to start with you. You need to really deeply understand who you are, what do you bring into the party, good and bad, and how you define success. Because different than your military career, when you make the transition out, you're kind of on your own, which can be kind of scary, but you also have a world of opportunity to explore new and different avenues. And if you don't know who you are, what you're bringing to the party in terms of capabilities and experience and passions and so on and so forth, and you don't know what good looks like for you, for your career, for your life success, it's really hard to engage with an employer in a way that's compelling. Now, when you've done that work, its next step is to understand, I believe, what are the employers looking for? Because at the end of the day, employers post jobs, they have open roles because they have certain business needs that have to be accomplished. And if what you're offering isn't answering their need, you don't become a compelling candidate. So understand who you are, what you bring to the party, how you define success on the one hand, understand on the other hand what the employer is looking for, and then work to build the bridge to close the gap between the two so you can become a compelling, attractive candidate for that open role.
So how does someone find out what employers are looking for?
Well, there's a lot of ways to go about it. Certainly, you can do your research. You can go online, Google, LinkedIn, all the online tools are great, but they are not a substitute for connecting with people. Challenger Gray Christmas, arguably the premier executive outplacement firm in globally, would tell you that over 80% of salaried professional jobs are landed by networking. Only about 5% get landed by sitting behind a laptop screen somewhere applying for jobs. Okay. At the end of the day, people hire people. So the best way to connect with opportunities is to connect with people. Do your research online, understand where the opportunities are, but don't rely on success from behind a screen. When you see an opening, make contact with folks. If you don't know anybody at the company, find somebody you know that knows somebody at the company. I'm a huge introvert, so learning how to do this was really hard for me. But once you learn how to do it, it's amazing how the doors start to open.
So, what was the most important thing that you learned in your own transition into the civilian sector? What did you struggle with? What was that big lesson that helped you turn the corner?
Yeah. So for me, the big thing for me was the first things I start with my. I had to understand who I was, what I'm bringing to the party, and how I define success. Because when I got out, I had no idea. I knew I was pretty capable of stuff. I didn't know if that stuff meant anything in the civilian world. And I tried to engage with folks, and whether it was an informal interview, an informational interview, just a happenstance connection, people said, "Well, tell me about yourself." And what I did was I didn't tell them anything about me. I told them about my military history, my military experience, which might be a little informative, but 93% of the population never served in uniform. So you're kind of going at down a risky path, going, well, I was a 90 Alpha 5 Papa 3 Romeo. They have no idea. Sorry about that.
No worries.
And when I tried to help them, I said, "Well, you didn't understand what that meant." So I said, "I was a tactical multifunctional logistics officer. That was airborne, nuclear, biological, and chemical certified." And they looked at me like, "Well, that's cute." Yeah, one of the things I had to learn is that sometimes the question you hear isn't the complete question they're asking. And I'm sure it happens a lot in networking. It's happened to me. It's happened to many of the folks I've coached. Say, well, what did you do in the military? Or tell me about yourself. That's only half the question. So rather than letting yourself get caught up in the wrong answer, reciting your resume, talking about things that you think were cool from your past, think about what the rest of the question is. The rest of the question is, tell me about yourself and how that relates to what I'm looking for. So let's say, for example, somebody has a job opportunity for a project manager because everybody wants to be a project manager, right?
Isn't that amazing? I think
Yeah,
that's it. From what I see, that's just about the only job in the world.
yeah, and it's good, and it's an important job, and there are many jobs out there that can add real value and can be great careers. But if somebody is searching for a project manager, you don't need to walk in and go, "Hey, I was a 90 Alpha 5 Papa 3 Romeo." That's irrelevant to them. I did project management work. Talk about the project management work in terms that they might actually understand. So a lot of lessons there. I don't know if I answered your question,
Yes,
but
you did. You did. You absolutely did. It's very important to be able to translate what you did in the military into civilian terms, into other language. And we make assumptions. I think it's my experience that every professional sector has their own language, and
for
they
sure.
have, when they're communicating with other people, they have to translate. So, what is the best way that somebody coming out of the military can learn that civilian culture, that civilian
I'm
language,
sorry,
the corporate
you,
language?
you broke up just a little bit, Annie. What was the question?
Oh, I'm sorry. What is the best way that somebody can learn that corporate language in their transition out of the military? What should they do?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to do it, and I'd like to think people to understand how they learn best. I mean, some people are readers, so find books that are relevant, and you can search. And some people are listen better podcast. That's great. And I think that's good in a general sense. Kind of get a general sense of the language. If you're kind of specific about, what industry you want to be in or geographic location you want to be in, start focusing your attention on those things. If you know you want to work in, for example, the automotive industry, well, then start Googling, current trends in the automotive industry. Um, think about companies that are interesting to you. And you don't have to do a master's thesis in research to decide that. You go, you know what? I think I want to work for Tesla. Well, why? I don't know. At first, it just kind of sounds cool. So start searching Tesla. Companies that have a big online presence, that's great. Companies that are publicly traded, they have SEC and other filings that, while they might not be terribly exciting reading, they can be hugely informative, not just in a looking backward sense of how was their last performance, but also in a forward looking sense, the strategy, the anticipated headwinds and tailwinds, what's the market direction they think they want. Hugely potentially valuable if you want to learn more about the industry. The other way to do it is to talk to people. Talk to people that are in the industry, in the function, in the company, in the geography that you want to be part of. And again,
Mhm.
if you don't know for sure right away what that is, don't overthink it. Pick one. Start doing your homework. I've worked with folks that I've seen this with sometimes retired senior NCOs, first sergeants, op sergeants. They go, you know what? I want to do HR work. Like, okay, why? Well, because I spent a lot of time, dealing with people and leading training and develop professional development, and that all seems to be in my wheelhouse. And then they come out and they start learning a little bit more about what HR means in the civilian world. That's just an example. They go, "Ooh, that's not what I want to do at all." Like, that's okay. You've learned. You've made some connections. Now, what is it you think you want to do next instead of that? So, do your research online. Talk to people.
Now, what is your best suggestion of the types of people to look for to talk with? What I typically do is I tell people to look for people who hold the jobs they have and ask them
Yep.
how they got there.
I 100% agree with you. I 100% agree with you. Mentorship is often defined as someone who's in or has been in the role or worlds you want to go to. So start developing your own kind of, I would say, informal mentorship by connecting with people that are or have been where you want to be. You want to be a project manager? Go on LinkedIn or otherwise and go, you know what? I want to talk to somebody who's a project manager. You want to do sales? Talk to people that are doing sales. You want to be in the real estate management world? Go talk to people. Now, how do you get in front of these folks and how do you identify them? Certainly, LinkedIn is a great tool. It's a great tool. Being online is great. But I'll suggest some other ways that can be very valuable include attending local trade association meetings. Okay, just be a guest. Go to
Right.
chambers of commerce. Yeah, go to a chamber of commerce meeting. Meet with other businesses that are in the area and just get to know them. I'm spot on. Talk to those people that are there. There's great folks, I think, that are well intended in the transition space that have spent, 10, 15, 20, 30 years in uniform, but have next to zero experience in the civilian world. And then there are folks in the civilian world that have never worn a uniform. Um, Both can add their own kind of value. Um, but I always suggest find somebody that is where you want to be.
Awesome. Now, Bill, in the military, we're used to having basically a path laid out for us,
Mhm.
regardless of whether we're enlisted or officer. There's a basic path for career progression. How does anybody figure that out in the civilian sector? What would be their career progression?
Well, it's funny you bring this up because, 22 years in corporate America, talent management, succession planning, career pathing was core to what I did for over 2 decades. And I will tell you, there's nothing that I've seen or experienced, and I've got a lot of experience that comes close to what the military does. If you come in as a one, E1, O1, W1, whichever, you know roughly how long you're going to be a one, what it takes to become a two, and you're a two to a three to a four, so on and so forth, right? The
Yeah.
the 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 rigor, the structure, the I'll suggest robustness of it is better than anything I've ever seen, despite my best efforts in the civilian world. One of the big distinctions I think that's important for transitioning service members to understand is that the military does it the way they do it because they can't go buy talent. If you want a new sergeant major, you don't go to an opposing force and just say, "Hey, give me one of your sergeant majors." You don't go bid for them on the basis of price or stock options or something like that. You have to grow your talent, right? In the civilian world, some companies build their talent, some build at different levels, but many companies buy their talent. Okay. They go out and recruit people. And that is often a cost versus investment business decision. You know, people expenses, including salaries and benefits and training, they are expenses and they
Right.
cut into your profit margin. They also take time. And if you're in a low margin, high pressure industry, like manufacturing,
Hmm.
for example, um, you might forego the investment in people development to go, you know what, I don't have time to go grow business unit president. We're going to do the best we can for as long as we can. And when we need one, we'll go recruit one. We'll buy them. I don't think that's always the best answer. Sometimes it is. Kind of depends on what the overall business strategy is. And this is part and parcel of what I did for 20 years. We look at the business strategy through the lens of talent. We did a lot of focus on succession planning. Who are
Hmm.
the next C suite members, presidents, VPs, and different companies went to different levels to
Right.
say, what is our need going to be and when? Not just based on who the incumbent is, but what's the business strategy? Are we going to be doing something different in the future? And perhaps our incumbent isn't necessarily the best qualified to do what we need to do in the future. Maybe they are, but maybe they're not. So, how do we build a pipeline of folks to get us ready for that next future business strategy need? I've had some good success with strategic planning for talent inside of the company, growing it. One of the
Hmm.
companies I was with, we had a business unit vice president, finance lead. When he moved on to something else, we had six dominoes fall where people were all ready to move up and into spots um, intentionally. So there is a very different approach to career progression in the civilian world. It's much more convoluted than the civilian world. And one of the biggest challenges that I think service members and veterans need to overcome is that lack of clarity. You could be doing all the right things, and the boss's nephew could get promoted instead.
Wow. It doesn't surprise me, but it's challenging to hear. So, so in that case, uh, what do you think about people planning out? How far out should people plan their civilian career?
Well, I'm a big advocate of planning for, I call it the rocking chair days. Where do you see yourself when you're done, whenever that is? You know what? I'm going to plan on retiring at 65, and success at that point looks like this. It means I have served as a business unit president in a mid-market company in this industry. And I've got X amount of money for this kind of quality of life, and then all the other life considerations. And then you backwards plan from that. See, I truly believe if you're aiming your development strategy on the next role only, you're never going to get to that clarity that anything like you saw in the military. You're always
Right.
chasing one next thing. And you could go think you're going from here to here to here, when in fact you're going from here to here. Then, oh, wait a minute, the next one's over there. And you start chasing a career all over. And for some folks, that's great. No big deal. But I like to encourage folks to go long term. What is What's success look like when you're old, gray, and sitting in a rocking chair? And then backward plan from that.
I love that. I love that. So there's a question, and this is what it is. As a service member, I learned to do what I'm told and work within the structure. I also learned that hard work does not increase my net worth. How will this help or hinder me in my civilian career progression, especially if I want to climb the ladder rapidly to increase my net worth?
Yeah, so I love that point because you can work your tail off and not be recognized, unfortunately, because, and sometimes I use this phrase and people don't like it, but there's two types of decision making when you really get to the root. There's rational decision making based on robust information and facts and a set process, and then there's what's called irrational decision making. It's not that it's crazy; it's just based on less than optimal facts and circumstances, right?
Mm-hmm.
And much of the civilian world operates on an irrational decision making basis. So I'm a brand new project manager and I'm working my tail off. I'm doing 60-hour weeks. I understand my deliverables. I'm delivering on everything, but I'm maybe not focusing on the relationships with other people. I'm maybe not connecting with the decision makers, the power brokers, the folks that maybe nobody knows that I want to advance. So you have to be a hard worker, but you have to be a hard worker across kind of a full spectrum. Got to do a great job in the job you're in. Always have to do that. But you got to understand that delivering the technical bits of your job are only part of setting yourself up for the future. So if you want to advance, make sure people know you want to advance, that you have that aspiration to go do something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
There will be times when you've done everything right and somebody else gets the job. That's the irrational part of it. And when that happens, and it will happen, it's happened to everybody, right? It's really a time to do a gut check and go, okay, what does this really mean to me in the big picture? So here I am. I'm a project manager. I've been with the company for 2.5 years. I'm delivering on everything. My performance reviews have been solid. I've got a bonus program. I'm hitting my maximum bonus. But Johnny got promoted instead of me. Okay, so what? I mean, if you take personal offense at it, you may be setting yourself up for failure. Now, on the other hand, if it impacts you that much, maybe you need to start looking for other options, other
How,
roles in
how
the
was I gonna? I was gonna ask you. Does that mean if you don't get promoted, does that mean you should be looking for the next thing?
I don't think on a one-time instance, all else being equal, that you necessarily have to look for something else. It kind of depends how the company handles it. So let's say I work for Annie, okay, and I've been doing everything right, and it's me and another person. The other person gets promoted, and Annie comes and says, "Bill, I love what you're doing. You're really valuable. I'm not going to get into why, but the other person, let's call him Fred. Fred got promoted and you didn't. It's not a reflection on your performance. Fred's a better fit for what we need in the future. I need you to keep doing it." Well, you know what? I hear that. That kind of softens the blow a little bit. If, however, Fred got promoted and I don't know how, and Fred's kind of a putz, and you never come and talk to me about it, I don't know where I stand. Yeah, I'm probably more likely to start looking. Now, let's talk about that a little bit, though, because another thing I see in the transition world is people land a job and they stop networking. Don't do
Yep.
that. Don't
I always
do
tell them just
that.
because you get a job doesn't mean you disappear from LinkedIn.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so many well-intended people, they get in the job and they're so focused on actually delivering and they're earnest and they got a great sense of ownership and that's wonderful, but they forget to connect with people in the company. I always say, nobody's more about your career than you. Okay. So do the right things, perform well, learn, grow, do all that, but let other people know about your interests and aspirations and availability and so on and so forth. And if those things, through no fault of your own, aren't happening in the company you're in, I think it would be wise to not jump. Don't jump ship. Don't be
Right.
imprudent. But Go check and see what's going on out in the world. Reconnect with folks. Annie, we were talking beforehand. I met with a gentleman this morning. We had breakfast. We worked together 30 years ago. Now he's working at a great company that I'm hoping to make some further contact with. And you know what? Don't don't stop connecting with good people. And not every conversation has to be about, hey, do you know of a job opening? People hire people, and you're more likely to get a audience to get hired if you have a relationship. Because I'll tell you, references, referrals go a long way. I sat on the hiring side of the desk for over 2 decades. And if I've got a stack of resumes my folks are going through, and Annie brings in somebody's resume and said, I know this person, they're a great fit for our company. Guess what? Right to the top of the pile. That only happens if you're connected with people.
Right.
It doesn't
And
have
that,
to be some big complex thing. But
and you've brought up a good point that we talk about all the time, with our community, and that is that networking is not about getting more business. Networking is not about getting a job. Not networking is building relationships, getting to
oh,
know people.
absolutely. Absolutely. If you connect with people in the name of networking and you lead with, hi, Annie, we've never met, but I'd like a job, there's no relationship there. That's kind of ham fisted. You don't want to do that. So, I want to bring up another point, if I could, on networking.
Sure.
Uh, I know oftentimes for folks, service members that are starting their transition, they're like, I don't want to network because it just feels kind of icky. It feels manipulative. And when I coach folks, I tell them, I said, the difference between proper networking and manipulation is intent. If your intent in a networking engagement is to create a relationship, provide some value to the other, and make an ask, that's networking. If your intent is to connect with somebody, get yours and leave them high and dry, that's manipulation. Okay.
Yeah.
So even if early on there's no apparent way that you think you can add value to somebody, the simple act of offering. Annie, it's been great talking to you today. I really appreciate our conversation and the insights. Is there anything I can do for you? Boom, done. You've opened the door to a potentially mutually value added relationship.
I love that. I love that. So one of my other questions is that, in the military, not only do we have our careers basically laid out for us, but there's schooling, there's education, there's learning that goes along with that. As a person in the civilian sector, do I need to find my way through that maze myself, or what would be the best way for somebody coming into the corporate sector to figure out what's the training they need?
Yeah, so that's very company dependent. Some companies invest pretty robustly in the training and development of folks. Okay, and I want to make a distinction, at least for my training. That word tends to be learning opportunities focused on improving your current performance, so you can
Okay.
better do the job you're doing.
Right.
Development tends to be those things that are focused on preparing you for the future. Okay. Now, given
Mhm.
that you've got to be able to do your job well to be considered, you might want to first start with what kind of training do I need? What do I need to have so I can perform well? And then what kind of development do I need that's relevant to the path that I want to go on? So, some companies will invest in both training and development, some won't. It's like, it's on you. Why? Because we can hire people, we can buy people, we can bring them in already qualified. It's sometimes a harsh reality that is very different from the military, but it is what it is.
Right.
Employee cost, training, development are expenses. And if you've got a company that is under tight profitability constraints, I've seen it over and over and over. When the budget's got to get cut, one of the first things to get cut is training, because that's a longer term investment as opposed to an immediate cost savings. I've seen it happen far too many times. Now, When that happens, understand the reality of where you are and figure out what you're willing and able to do to invest in yourself.
And
So
you know,
let's
that's a
say,
really important thing that you said. There's a specific word that you used: invest. It's not what
mhm,
training costs for companies or individuals, it's an investment. And that's what people need to think about. It's an investment in their future. Thank you. So, another
absolutely.
question out of the chat is: does loyalty to an organization serve me in the same way it did in the military, or should I be planning to change companies regularly?
So loyalty is different than it was in the military. It's also different than it used to be from earlier in my world in prior generations. My grandparents. You started with a company, and unless you chose really to do something totally different, you potentially had a job for life, and you
Right.
had a pension, and you retired from there, and life was good. That started changing a few decades ago. Um, the way I like to answer that question is you need to be loyal to the company to the extent that, and I'll explain the term in a minute, that the rental agreement is being fulfilled. See, I look at an employment engagement as a rental agreement.
I love
The
it. I love
employer
that.
is renting your business behavior. You are engaged with them as long as they're doing what they need to do to keep your quality of life as you need it and according to the agreement. It's not a written contract in the US anyway, most cases. As long as the rental agreement is being fulfilled on both sides, stay loyal. Okay. If they change the terms and they go, that no longer works for me, then it doesn't work for you. You may or may not be able to change the direction they're going in, but I don't I don't see it as disloyal if you have to do something different to advance your career. So you want to be loyal, but you don't want to be blindly loyal. You always have to remember, and when you're joining a company, what is it they need and how can I fulfill that need? But you also have to remember that while you're working, you got to vet how the experience lines up with your ideals for your life.
That's
And if they
awesome.
don't
Thank
line
you.
up, yeah, yeah. So there you go.
So, I have two questions for you before we wrap this up. What is the most common question people ask you about working in the civilian sector that we haven't discussed this morning?
How much am I going to get paid?
And what do you tell them? Hmm,
Well, the other what I tell them is you're going to get paid what you're worth, and the employer decides what you're worth. Doesn't mean it's right, but they'll decide. Okay, and in all seriousness, if people are worried about the money first, they're going to make their transition harder. Okay, you have to know how much money you want, and I'll suggest you have to know how much money you need, and that need is often far less than what you want. Okay, um, but you got to understand what the market's willing to pay for what it is you do. Good employers do their homework. They want to pay as little as possible to get the best possible talent. That doesn't mean they're all going to be low paying, okay? But they want to be
right.
competitive across the employment market. So they come work for me instead of Annie or Annie. If you focus first on the money, it's going to make your life harder. And you may get paid what you want to get paid, and you may get worked to death. There's a phrase, to those whom much is given, much is expected. Yeah, I did
Yeah.
it for 20 years. I was making good money, and
Yeah, yeah, and, and I hear that from people all the time. They want a really high salary going into the civilian sector, but they're looking for a reduced tempo compared to what they've been living in the
yeah,
military,
yeah,
and the two don't necessarily equate.
they don't necessarily equate. That's correct. The other piece of that is don't chase a title. Okay, chase a job. I've heard people, I'll only work as a director or vice president. Okay, well, on the surface, you're maybe not qualified for that yet. Don't be afraid to take a job that on all other levels works for you, that maybe doesn't have the title that seems quite as attractive as you might want. Because what I've seen over and again is that veterans enter the workforce, and by and large, they tend to outperform their colleagues and move up pretty quickly compared to others.
Yeah, awesome. So my last question for you, because we could go on forever. But I want to know, what is the question you wish people would ask you about working in the civilian sector?
Oh, wow. What do I wish people would ask me is how do I bridge that culture gap? How do I bridge the culture? Because it's real. And, depending on their circumstance, the answers could be very different. A first term enlisted soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, their situation is different than a 30-year-old six, But if they ask a question like that, how do I bridge the culture gap? That tells me they know there is one. They may not know what it is yet, but they know there is one. And what that really gets to is, how do I best fit in this new world? That's really what that means to me. If they would ask that, we could have all kinds of great discussions. And it would lead us back to, well, I don't know how you'd best fit. Who are you? What do you bring into the party? How do you define success? What do you aspire to do? Where do you plan to be? And then we can start to narrow down typical expectations for those kind of roles, those kind of goals, so we can identify where we might have some challenges.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I want to give you a chance to tell us about the books that you have written and your foundation. But I want to just address a couple of things that I see here in the chat. There are some questions about honesty and assessments and performance ratings. We're going to do a whole additional session. We're going to focus exactly on that topic with some guests in the near future. So we're not going to address that today, but it is an important topic, and so we will. So, Bill, tell us about the books that you've written and how our listeners, our viewers, can access them.
Oh, good. I appreciate the opportunity. So I've written two books. The first one is Military Career Transition: Insights from the Employer Side of the Desk. What really started this was COVID. I kicked off my business in 2018. Things were growing, and then COVID hit, and everything kind of took a pause. I was sitting in my home office looking at a whole stack of notes, going, "What am I going to do with these?" And anyway, long story short, we organized them into a book. The book has 151 insights from the employer side of the desk. What are the expectations and norms from an employer's perspective? What's the culture like in the business world? What is networking? How does it work? And what is transition? Because it's a thing unto its own. And what are some typical practices for interviewing, recruitment, selection, and those kind of things? The reason I wrote that, beyond I had a messy desk during COVID, was that I found far too often too many veterans. I kind of, and I say this tongue in cheek, but they kind of ran around like 6-year-olds on a soccer field. A whole bunch of folks full of energy going, "There's something to do here. I got to transition," help each other, but they're in this crowd and nobody's been there. The other thing I found is recently transitioned folks who never spent a day in the civilian world, or well intended, as we said earlier, civilian folks who never spent a day in uniform. I thought, wait a minute, I have succeeded and failed on both sides of that desk. I have maybe a little different experience that might add value to folks. And the way I approach it is a bit, the mental construct is, Annie, you're familiar, intelligence prep of the battlefield, IPB, right?
Right.
I don't
Mhm.
know if all branches use it. Army does, Marine Corps does, I believe. But intelligence prep of the battlefield, understanding the battlefield you're about to enter from various dimensions before you enter it. I call my work intelligence prep of the career battlefield, because I truly believe that if transitioning service members have a better idea of the world they're getting into, they have a higher chance of success. So that book came out in 2021. It was a number one new release in Amazon's job hunting category. It is available on Amazon in ebook and paperback. Second book came out, co-authored with a gentleman named David White, a retired Army Ranger first sergeant, and he and I was coaching him job transition, and along the way he goes, I can land jobs, but when I land, I'm not finding ones that feed the beast. It's not a fit. It's not, passion's not there. So we need to write a book about what happens after you land. I said, I've already written a book. I don't want to write another book. But he convinced me. Well, yeah, that book came out May of last year. While it's still insight based, it's more story formatted. So in there, there's about another 100 insights, but there's over 60 stories that Dave and I have experienced either directly or with others, with and through others, about what happens once you land. What do you do on those first few days so you stick the landing, right? And we suggest the best thing to do is just identify the who's and the what's. You don't have to figure it all out in the first few days. But once you've landed and gotten through that identification bit, then you got to integrate well and really learn the who's and the what's and how do they fit and how do you fit with them. And then over time, you got to thrive and survive well and leverage all of those learnings that you had in the
Right.
new job. And more important, or just as importantly, leverage the experiences you've had from your past in your future. Okay. Sometimes folks get really hung up about, I don't want to walk away from the military. I mean, it's been great to me. I loved it, whatever. You say, well, you don't have to. You can honor your past by leveraging it in your future, but you got to do it in a way that fits in that new culture. So, yeah, both are available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. So I appreciate the opportunity to share that.
Thank you. Thank you. I hope that everybody who's watching or listening will get those books, because I think you'll find a wealth of information that will make a difference for you. So thank you so much, Bill, for spending this time with us. I really appreciate it. Thank you. And so everybody, if you can put in the chat to thank Bill, I'd really appreciate that. I am going to put up here a link to the registration page. I can't end without putting up the link for the registration page for Changing Focus, Moving from We to Me. It's for veterans, service members, and veterans from any era who are currently transitioning, military spouses as well. If you need to reset your life, we have a spot for you in an upcoming cohort, and you can get more information and register right there at that link. So I'm seeing the comments coming in the chat saying thank you. I thank you very much, and we'll see you again next month.
Thank you.